Okay, we'll call to order the North Canton Planning Commission meeting, October 5th, 2022. It is now 7:06 p.m. First thing on the agenda here is roll call. Miranda, if you could.
Mr. Dalpace,
Here.
Mr. Mahousen, Mr. Sarah, Mr. Volas,
Here.
Mr. LePage.
Here.
Okay, the first thing here is submit minutes for consideration. Submit the June 1st, 2022 meeting minutes for approval. I will make a motion for approval. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, roll call.
Mr. Volas,
Yes.
Mr. LePage,
Yes.
Mr. Dalpace.
Yes. Okay, next is to submit the August 3rd, 2022 adjudication hearing minutes for approval. I would make a motion for approval on these minutes.
Second.
We have a second. Roll call.
Mr. LePage,
Yes.
Mr. Dalpace,
Yes.
Mr. Volas.
Abstain.
And then minutes for consideration to submit the August 30th, 2022 adjudication hearing minutes for approval. I'll make a motion to approve.
Second.
Roll call.
Mr. Dalpace,
Yes.
Mr. Volas,
Abstain.
Mr. LePage.
Yes.
Okay. Next section is our public hearing. The meeting is to consider the following amendments to the city's planning and zoning code from City Council. First item is an ordinance repealing and replacing Chapter 1151, signs of the codified ordinances of the City of North Canton. This is an ordinance amending Chapter 1136, the Main Street District's regulations of the codified ordinances of the City of North Canton, to repeal Section 1136.17 signage in its entirety. Okay, so do we have someone from the applicant to discuss this item?
Hello, I'm Ben Young. I'm the clerk of City Council, and I will be here on behalf of City Council as the applicant this evening. I was also part of the team that drafted this ordinance. I will do my very best to answer all your questions this evening.
Okay.
I'll start with just sort of a high-level overview. So we took the city's existing sign code and effectively rewrote the entire thing. That's why you guys don't have a red line version tonight, because it would just be all red. It is the same structure as the existing sign code in that we've separated signs into types, and then those types are regulated specifically. But we've reformatted the code for those permanent signs that all of the regulations for a specific sign type are contained together in one section, so that, let's say you want to build a wall sign, you only have to look at one place to find everything you need to know about building that wall. In the previous code, you would have to check 2 or 3 sections for supplemental regulations, things like that. Our intent in rewriting the permanent sign portion of this is that businesses would be permitted a greater sign area, but fewer sign types. So the hope is that we end up with a more cohesive look as you drive through the city of similar signs throughout a district. So this more strictly limits the types of signs that can be put at each location, but generally allows you to have either more of those signs or a larger version. So that's permanent signs. If you guys want to ask me questions about permanent signs before we get into temporary signs, or I can go over high-level temporary signs.
You can go ahead and go over it all, and then we'll, I'm sure, drill back down through it.
Okay. So sort of the second half of this is temporary signs, which we all know and love. In the current code, there are 3 categories of temporary signs, and each category has different regulations. Currently, you're supposed to get a permit to put up a temporary sign. There's a limitation of 30 to 45 days based on the type of sign, and there are no restrictions on where you can actually physically put that temporary sign. So the new proposal is very different from that current code. And that's in response to some Supreme Court decisions trying to thread the needle of what's permitted without violating freedom of speech. So the proposal eliminates the categories for temporary signs. All temporary signs would be treated the same. You wouldn't need a permit to put one in your yard. You could just put it in your yard. However, you are only allowed one sign per 200 linear feet of frontage. And by that I mean, for every 200 linear feet you can have one more sign, not that the signs have to be 200 feet physically separated from each other. We've also added restrictions on sign placement, so they must be 8 feet away from the public right of way and 10 feet away from intersections or fire hydrants. We've added a maximum size for temporary signs at 32 square feet. And then the only length of posting restriction that we have is if you have a specific date on the sign. So for example, it's farmer's market on October 4th. 10 days after that specific date, it must come down. But otherwise, there are no more 30-day or 45-day limitations. Administration was having trouble enforcing those. And then sort of the last part of this whole rewrite is there are stronger enforcement standards for non-conforming signs. So for example, temporary signs would no longer have to go through the nuisance, hey, your sign's in violation, you have 30 days to take it out of your yard. It would just be, your sign's in violation, we're taking it out of your yard. That is my high-level overview. I'm happy to answer any questions you have.
Okay. Martin, any comments from the city, from your side of things?
Ben fairly well covered it. It was a collaborative effort, and of course, this does bring us into compliance with it mitigates the concern of a First Amendment violation. Does allow some options for business owners, and with that, staff recommends an approval on that. I'm happy to answer questions as well.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, I forgot to mention, the second ordinance is repealing some other signage provisions that were in the Main Street zoning district portion. We had sort of started a mini sign rewrite when we adopted the Main Street district. This would be taking that out and incorporating it into the larger.
Yeah, so it's just so everybody's clear, 1136.17, that's in the Main Street district regulations. There was signage for the Main Street districts in that section. This is removing it out of there and just placing it all together in 1151, so it's more concise and clear, along with every other piece that's been put in here. So thank you for doing that, because I think that makes things much easier for somebody trying to figure out what sign they need. No matter where they are in the city, they just know to go to one section now. So that's good. Okay, any comments from our commission members?
Do political campaign signs, they don't fall under a temporary sign, or where do those fall?
They would be considered a temporary sign. So our current code has provisions about, X number of days after the election. Political signs are actually explicitly what the Supreme Court decision was about, that we as a city cannot regulate political signs as a special sign class, because that is considered a content-based restriction. So they would just be considered temporary signs with any other temporary sign you might stick in your yard.
Did you say one every 200 feet?
You get one for every 200 feet you have. So that if you have 400 feet, you could put them right next to each other. They don't
So
have
you
to.
can put more than one in?
If you have 200 feet of frontage on the street, yeah. Which the vast majority of residential lots do not.
Do not.
Yeah.
So in theory,
People would be a lot of people would be in violation.
you would only have the ability to put one sign up if you're lot was 100 feet long of frontage, correct?
Correct.
Correct.
The minimum is,
And then the one would fall under, can't be more than 32 square feet. Can't be located within 8 feet of a right of way, et cetera, et cetera.
Correct.
Correct. Okay.
and all of those temporary sign regulations were intended to be something that a nuisance officer or a police officer could easily identify just driving past in their car, right? So you, just driving past, you can see, oh, that's more than 8 feet, close to the street, or, you know, you put it right next to a fire hydrant, clearly you're not 10 feet from fire. So
Right.
the hope is that as our enforcement officers drive around, they'll see it, easily identify it, and be able to just pull it out of the yard right then.
That would also discourage people from putting them at street corners, right? So where they just get dumped at a corner, especially the political signs,
Mhm.
in the right of way, right at the corner, because people think it's public space. Those could be removed at that point.
Yes, so that's why we added the 10 feet from an intersection rule.
Right.
Because, you know, people don't think when they put them there.
Yeah.
They may make it hard to see when you're trying to turn or something like that,
Correct.
so. You could not put it, like Apple Grove in Maine tends to get a lot of political signs in October, November, so
Yeah.
those would not be permitted.
Mhm.
Peter, any comments?
No, not really.
Okay. Yeah, just staying on the temporary section. It is tough. I mean, from the city's perspective, and I've read, or, you know, I started reading around a little bit about this, especially when it comes to political signs. But like, you know, Ben said, you know, there's been Supreme Court rulings on this, and it seems like it changes every 2 years about these political signs. I mean, literally, if you just start Googling it, it's like every 2 years there's some new thing about it. So it's tough to figure out a way to limit, enforce, whatever it may be when it comes to temporary signs, because then they fall under political signs and then things get very muddy. I mean, I think this is an improvement for sure. I think personally, I think the city has a temporary sign problem along with a lot of other cities. Too many are out there and too many are left for way too long. So I think this does, like Ben said, you know, someone can clearly see that it's in violation, that it can get removed. My concern is the time component being removed, because although, you know, someone from the city or police officer can, you know, see that, hey, that's in 8 feet of the right of way or a higher fire hydrant, or it's too big, it's clear. But also, I think there needs to be still a time component for reporting by a citizen and proof. I'll pause my comments there. Could we make a note that Tom Sarah is present at the meeting
Late.
at 7:19 p.m.? Welcome, Tom.
Had a little problem getting here.
That's okay. That's okay. Glad you made it. There's less people here tonight, so I don't think there's less people to offend, so you're okay. So I think I think there should be a time component somehow. I know that's hard to enforce from a city perspective, but I know of a specific spot on a residential property that the signs have been there for 6 months. Now, if I were to, if as a citizen, if I took a photo of it, I documented, I sent it to the city, I said, hey, it was here on this date, and here it is again on this date in the exact same spot. Then the city would be able to go remove it, even if it meets all these guidelines. But I don't think we should have temporary signs that turn into permanent signs is the issue. And I just see a lot of those. And I know we don't want a nuisance officer or whomever from the city, like keeping a database of these things. But I think there should be some way to like report it and say, hey, could this get taken care of? Here's the proof that it exists. I mean, you know, I spoke to Ben about this briefly, that this was on the agenda, and it's like it's just like a fence in somebody's yard. You know, if my neighbor puts a fence 3 feet into my yard, I can say to the city, hey, here's a picture of it. It's 3 feet into my yard. Like, can you get this taken care of? And then someone can come look at it and resolve the issue. So I think, personally, I think there should be a time component. I don't know if any commission members, would consider that as well, because, and I don't know what it is. I mean, I think you just use the 30-day, hey, if it's more than 30 days and it hasn't been moved, it needs to be removed for at least 2 weeks or something. Because I don't know what else to do, especially in residential districts. And as Ben mentioned, if it has a specific date on the sign, like, hey, this is the festival, it's, October 8th, and then a week after, it has to be gone. But if you put up a sign in your yard that says whatever, it could be there forever, in theory. And I don't know if 2020 counts. If we can remove it after 2020 or 2024 or 20, if some sign went up in 2020 and it says 2020 on it, shouldn't we be able to remove it in 2021? I don't know. It has a date on it. Just from an election sign perspective.
So Ben, I thought you indicated that there was a time limit provision, and
Oh,
the chairman saying there's not what he's looking for.
so when Eric spoke to me earlier today, he asked me about this. The date provision would only apply to a specific date. So if you actually say the day
Specific event.
specifically, but if you just say, Matheny 2020, that's not specific enough for us to enforce that has passed.
Yeah. And I don't know where that would fall under law either. I don't, maybe there's something in a ruling somewhere that says you can't take it down because it's a political sign. I don't know. But it used to be very clear that everyone understood 30 days after, or a week after the election, every sign came down. But now it seems, for some reason,
There's a few.
there's
There's a few
signs.
that linger.
Yeah, there's been signs left for years, so I'm not sure, but I think that we shouldn't remove a time limit just for certain cases where it can be documented that, hey, this has been out here way too long, type of situation. Because if we don't have that in there at all, then it literally cannot be enforced whatsoever.
True, you could effectively just.
As long as it meets the guidelines and it's in the right spot and right size, it could stay permanently.
The administrator's concern was when we've tried to force things like that in the past, they have become he said, she said of when the sign
Right.
went up.
Yeah.
And then we've also had people say, oh, well, I moved it 5 feet to the left 3 days ago. So technically I took it down for
Sure.
3 minutes and put a new one back up.
Yeah.
So it just becomes sort of a mess of trying to prove that 30 consecutive days have passed
Mm-hmm.
without this sign moving.
Okay. Any other thoughts on temporary signs before I wanted to move back to the permanent sign section? Tom, anything to add?
No, I agree with what you're saying. There needs to be, seems like can be something of calendar days put in. Then I know it's all at discretion of the city then, but if there's something in there, then does it allow us to request it to be removed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I agree with what you're saying on that. Concern I have also.
Okay. On the permanent signs, one second while I get back to the charts. Under Schedule 1151.06D, wall sign regulations by district. All these are very similar, but one thing I wanted to discuss was the Main Street Central and Main Street South Gateway. The maximum sign area, square feet equal to 5% of facade on which the sign is to be mounted. Now, as you can see, in North Gateway is the same, and then when it moves to Main Street North, Main Street South, it's a little bit different calculation. I did some math on that, and I just had a concern of if we have a user in the Main Street Central District, a very large building, a single tenant. I mean, if you have a building facade that's 300 feet long and 55 feet high, you could potentially have an 825 square foot sign on that building. And the max height could be 19.25 feet. So you could have a 19 by 42 foot, almost 43 foot sign on the building along with the other signs. And I was just looking at these and I was thinking these should step down to Main Street Central so that in our core, signage is somewhat slightly less. Now, if you could have, say, a multi-tenant user in that same facade, so then I think it should read like the total amount of wall signage is square feet equal to 5% of facade. Meaning if you had a multi-tenant user, the maximum sign combined of each user would be that calculation. But if you could imagine in our core, if you had a single user with a large piece of property, one user only, they could have a very large sign on the building, which I think might be out of scale with downtown, potentially. So I wonder if that should, number one, like I said, total square footage signage, but then also maybe have a limit for single sign size of whatever we could deem respectable. Because you imagine if somebody came in and bought an entire block and put in a large office building or whatever it may be, a large multifamily development, that would be considered one user if they had a very big facade, meaning the facade's 300 feet long and let's say it's 60 feet tall. They could have 1,000 square foot sign on that building. And with our new zoning, that building could be right at the street, right? So then you have 1,000 foot sign right at the sidewalk on the top of the building. That's massive, right? So I think there should be like some sort of qualifier there of maximum single sign size of 400 square feet, 200 square feet or something, whatever.
So something similar to where they go on the freestanding signs where they have multi-tenant plazas.
Right.
Hey, something similar to where they have section 1151.07 for freestanding signs where they limit
Yeah.
the square foot for multi-tenant plaza.
Yeah, and even like the walls, the projecting sign, it's the same thing. Is not wider than 2 feet, does not exceed 6 feet in height. Whatever, I think we could apply the same scenario to, okay, 5% of facade for total signage in a multi-tenant case. And if it's a single user, the maximum amount, period, is 400 square feet, 600 square feet, whatever number we deem respectable. Because I just think something could get out of whack very quickly with a large single tenant user.
So you're suggesting, it's like for the maximum sign area row, retitling that like maximum total sign area.
Yeah,
And then add another row that's something to the effect of, maximum area for a single sign.
yeah, correct, right. And it really, I mean, the only area I think it really, is the core is the issue. We have the zoning was written so that we have these districts that step down to the center, right? So more automobile, less automobile, less automobile. And the core, I feel like the signage should reduce the same way. On the ends, it's taller, more automobile centric, and as we move towards the core, they should reduce in height and also reduce in size from that perspective of especially a single user. And if you had a multi-user, it's gonna somewhat, limit itself out and work itself out. Then monument signs. That's 1151.05 C. Correct, yes. Monument sign regulations by district, that chart. The same thing there, I just wondered in our Main Street Center, instead of 8 feet for the monument sign, that we should step that down to 6 feet, similar to the RMF, the multifamily. I understand that it's conditional for the Main Street Center. So, I mean, they're gonna, somebody would have to come in and get a conditional use for that sign. But if it was approved, I don't know if that should be 8 feet in our core, especially, if it's a more walkable area or walkable development. I don't know if you want an 8 feet sign along the sidewalk, 8 foot tall in the core of the city. I know the multifamily's at 6, so I would think we could just match the multifamily at 6. And then the other districts, it goes to the 8, and it goes conditional and then obviously permitted for the other districts.
Yeah, I agree. On the monument signs, does that also include the directional signs?
No, so if
No,
you
I
had
think
like a enter here sign, and the only thing on it is enter here, that would not count against your sign.
Well, what is it like with our, new business, Depot next door that has a good sized building and they want to get signage to direct the trucks and the customers and they may have multi-directional signs that will also be kind of a monument sign that has their name on it. How would that fall in this?
I mean, my assumption in writing this would be that, or my intent when we wrote this was that you could put, people next door proceeding with an arrow. I would defer to Marty, who will actually enforce this if enacted, about whether or not he would count that as a sign, an advertising sign. So if Marty has an answer, he's welcome to go.
I believe we have
I thought there was a directional.
some directional sign regulation in our parking chapter. No, the parking chapter does refer us back to 1151.
Did the directional piece get removed? Because I thought we had a directional piece in the signage section at one point.
It is in the definitions, 115102. Parent 7, there's,
We do have in here that directional signs are not considered advertising signs regulated under this, but I do think Mr. Sarah brings up a potentially good point. If I put the
Yeah.
name of my business on the directional sign, does it now count as advertisement and not direction?
Well, I wonder, I think there should be something defining directional signage, and I thought there was previously. Do you see anything in there? Do you have a copy, Marty, of the existing?
I do.
I know you wish I didn't show up tonight, but
No, I that's a good point, is the directional signage, because I swore we had at one point, it was in the code somewhere regarding directional signage. And I think it needs to be defined somewhere.
There's instructional sign,
I think it might be, that's what it fell under, instructional.
115102.
Yeah,
A, and 9 in parentheses on the top of page 503. We're looking at.
yeah.
That's where it is.
number 7 there.
Number 9, I think.
Oh, yeah, you have directional sign and instructional
Okay, there you
sign,
go.
7 and 9.
So
Yeah,
the,
that was in 115108 is what it used to be
correct, it
in our
was.
current code.
Mhm.
That's what I remember it from.
So the current code limits it to 3 feet in each of the districts except the residential. Shown on the table here.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that needs some work. Because that was in 115108. Directionals, listed directional signs and instructional signs. Because, yeah, what we have, I think what the intent of this was, probably looking at this, we have a monument sign. And then under 115108, it's it's called freestanding sign. Now, under that, the freestanding sign regulation says 1 permitted. Well, so it depends on the district. So Main Street Center, they're not permitted. Main Street.
My suggestion would be to add to 115103B, number 12, under signs exemption regulations, add directional and instructional signs less than 3 feet tall. That would sort of pull in our current codes limitations on directional.
Right. Yeah, something needs to be hashed out there with that for sure. And I would almost, to Tom's point. So you're saying, Ben, that you would put it so that they're exempt, but they can only be so big.
Yeah.
That would probably be the way to do it. Because like you know, Diebold or another user that has a large area of site, you're gonna have multiple directional signs depending on traffic patterns, who's coming in and out. So you don't wanna limit that.
Well, I just use Diebold, but
Yeah.
could use schools.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many users that would apply to. It'd probably just fall under the discretion of the building official.
Yeah, we don't want that to happen.
So, yeah, Ben, I think something needs worked out with those for sure. So yeah, monument sign, Main Street Central. Then 11. So this is kind of, these two go hand in hand. 115108 and 5107. So let's start with 5108D. That is that right? Am I on the right section here? Sorry, one second.
Oh, wait, would be.
No, the freestanding signs, 1151.08, section Schedule D, the freestanding signs. So maximum sign height. So our light poles in the code are at 25 feet maximum. So it's a 5-foot base, 20-foot pole. So it's 25 feet high max. And that's where I kind of started with this, trying to remember, make sure that was the case. So then if we look at the freestanding sign regulations, Main Street, North Gateway, South Gateway at 25 feet. North and south is 8 feet. Center is not permitted, which I like. GBA, GBB, OB at 25 feet. My concern was the GBA, GBB. We have some locations of that zoning that I'm not sure 25 feet would be acceptable. I think it might be too high. And I don't know if some areas need looked at as far as the zoning, what they actually are. Maybe that might fix the issue, or if it's just, they are what they are. But I think that was somewhat concerning was the GBA, GBB, OB. And I would almost, I would like to see that reduced, but then I almost wonder if that should be a conditional use for those districts since they do fall. A couple of those, we have sites in the city that are zoned that are literally across the street from residential or something. So my concern is like, oh, there's a 25-foot sign and there's a housing development across the street.
Yeah, but we do have a lot of, I'm thinking, we do have some signs that currently are that.
Yeah, they currently are for sure. Yes, correct. I'm just thinking moving forward, should that be reduced to just throwing it out there? Looking at the zoning map, I saw some that seemed maybe questionable for that height. And then,
Before we move on, Ben, the top of exhibit A, page 8, schedule 115108D. Exhibit A, page 8. I think that should be a schedule 115107D.
oh yeah, you're
It's
correct.
falling under section 07.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I noticed that.
Okay.
And marked it myself. Why it has a draft watermark on it.
Okay.
The formatting the tables was tricky.
Okay.
Yeah. And then a sign on Whipple Lots with frontage on Whipple, the maximum height shall be 35 feet for that corridor. And then we also, for the special regulations for multi-tenant plazas, for lots containing more than 5 acres, 2 or more tenants, the sign may not exceed 25 feet. So, that was just a thought I had for that one district. Don't know if anybody has any other comments on the height outlined in there. I think that the height is a very good example of stepping down. North Gateway is 25, north-south 8, center's not permitted. I think that really fits the intent of zoning, the zoning code. Same with the maximum sign area. And then the only other comment I think I had for the permanent, the electronic message signs. Let me just check tables here. Signs. So the electronic message, obviously they're not, in this they are not permitted on any wall signs. Thank you. I will go on public record to say that I think electronic message signs, I would prefer if they didn't exist in our city, but that's my personal opinion. I would like to state on record. So between the freestanding signs and the monument signs, so on monument signs, Main Street Center, electronic message is, so if an electronic message sign is conditional use or permitted, the maximum face of the sign can be 25% electronic. Now, in the monument signs, Main Street Center is a conditional use. North Gateway, North, South, and South Gateway is permitted. GBA, GBBOB is permitted. Conditional for P&I, LI, not permitted for residential multifamily. Now, under freestanding signs, Main Street Center doesn't apply. Doesn't apply. Multifamily not permitted. G, B, and A is permitted. That's the same as the other. North Gateway, South Gateway, permitted. That's the same as monument sign. Main Street North and South is not permitted. So the freestanding sign is not permitted to have an EMC, but in the same district, the monument sign is permitted to have an EMC. And the North Gateway, South Gateway is permitted for both. So I just wonder if anybody has any comments or thoughts on how that breaks down. I mean, I personally would love to see them just conditional across the board. I don't see a case of a business saying, I am not going to put business in your city because they can't put up an electronic sign. Home Depot, Meijer, these large companies, they're looking simply at traffic patterns and people's patterns. They're not going to not come to our community because of an electronic sign. Does anyone else feel you would agree with that, Peter? I mean, you probably know better than me. Yeah. So I just don't think they have a place I mean, I know we have some now because that's the way the code was, but I think this is an opportunity to clean that up and just say, at least say they're conditional. If we can't decide, if someone can't decide on how much or which districts or whatever, I mean, they should not, I don't think they should be in Main Street Center whatsoever. I think that should be not even conditional. That should be not permitted. The center of town should not have those. I mean, everyone talks about cities that they love, these communities are very, very nice. We can all think of communities we've been to that are very nice. And the large majority of them have very strict signage laws. That's why they're nice. Because they don't have electronic signs blasting people in the face. And I understand in this, the city's work to reduce the brightness, which kudos to that. There is a section now in here that says, hey, it has to meet certain brightness, especially at night, it has to be on a dimmer, etc. But I still think, I don't know, that either this is just straight up conditional or it gets reduced somehow. Because I think they have a time and a place, and I think that's few and far between.
I don't know. I think the sign market is changing so fast that we're seeing so more modern signage coming out that it's going to involve more of some type of form of electronic sign. So I hate to limit that and not have the capability of a business to be able to advertise with that new technology that's coming on the market.
Right. Okay. Would that be solved though with the conditional versus permitted? Meaning we would be able to see what it is? The board would be able to see what it is versus, because I know what you're saying, Tom, because that's the, I mean, you could have a very nice electronic sign versus a very bad one.
Yeah.
Yeah, but at what point does it turn into a video sign,
Right,
right, where you're basically broadcasting messages?
right.
We're saying the same thing with electronic signs?
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, they're all, yeah, it's just lumped together, electronic message center.
We have TV screens on the street.
Right,
in the future. Good.
Times Square.
Right.
Mhm.
And the question is, do we want,
Where-
yeah, exactly, yeah.
Be kind of cool,
We're having a New Year's Eve party.
Yeah, yeah.
Sounds like a drive-in.
So I don't know, I'm just, that was one section that,
Chairman, may I ask a question?
yeah, sure,
So if it does go to a conditional use, that gives the planning commission leeway as to what to allow and what not to allow?
right, right. I mean, someone would have to come in and present, right, Marty, this is the sign, this is what I plan on using the sign for, projecting,
That gives you a little bit more discretion as
Right.
to help assist a new business coming in, or as
yeah,
Peter said, I think you're gonna have time,
huh?
you might have new businesses coming in. How do you accommodate and
right.
invite them in?
And maybe it's something like, to Tom's point, maybe it's something like revolutionary, right? This is gonna be, because I've seen electronic signs that are amazing. And maybe it is that way. Well, they could come in, they could present it, and we say, wow, that's great. You get a conditional use. And they could say, well, I really want more than 25% of this maximum area because to pull this off, it needs to be larger. Well, then they can go to ZBOA and present the case and say, hey, this is why we think this is gonna be awesome for the city. And then they could get it enlarged if that was the limitation.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of conditional.
Yeah,
And then what, it could turn into electronic billboard too.
right. Exactly, yeah. Yeah, that's all, yeah, that's my concern for sure. Yeah.
Conditional uses are good.
Yeah, I mean, a prime example is in, Chicago, down at the park, right in the city, right by the bean, the big chrome bean. They have the water fountain that's actual pictures of people that squirts out the water. That's a prime example. That's a nice public display. Obviously, it's a major city, but you could have something very similar in a smaller city on a smaller scale and say, hey, that's technically a sign. We don't want to, like you said, limit you from doing it, but you got to come present the idea. That way we don't get anything bad or inappropriate. Okay, so I would say that's a comment. Those are our comments for that section. So, I think that's all I had on my list for those. Yes, that's all I had. Any other comments, Benjamin? Thoughts?
I don't believe so. I mean, I'm, happy to answer questions. That you guys have pretty much hit on everything that changed, so.
Yeah. So,
One question for you.
Yeah.
So if, existing conditions get grandfathered in for this legislation, right?
Correct. So if you have a business right now whose sign would not comply with this, we cannot, walk up tomorrow and be like, we changed our code, you have to take your sign down now.
yeah,
You get to keep your existing sign. Now, if that sign falls into disrepair or you take it off, you can't
Yep.
put it back later.
What in the event of a change of use or a change of ownership, how does that work?
Change of use would trigger the new sign code to apply, but, like, let's say it's a Wendy's franchise and it's just bought by a different franchisee, and it's the same use consistent, that wouldn't trigger the new sign to apply.
But repairs could be allowed for
Yeah.
existing sign.
yeah, right.
We would like to repair your existing.
Okay, well, at this time, to recommend, we have the options to recommend the following to City Council. That the amendment be adopted as submitted, the amendment be adopted as modified by the Planning Commission, or the amendment be denied. My concern is we've brought a lot of things to the table tonight, so I'm not sure. I don't know if it'd be in our best interest as adopted as modified, since we can't list all these out individually to make sure they get touched upon.
I would like to see revision and
Right,
review it one more time.
right. Yeah, I would tend to agree, so that if Benjamin, we can bring it back with our comments from the record and see where they land, and then if there's something off from that, we can at least just make one or two comments and get it approved.
Okay.
I'm not sure how if we, adopt this as a planning commission, does it go to council for amendment again, or what's the procedure after what happens here? Martin, do you know, or
This does still
Benjamin?
need to go to city council, and the city council, still has to hold a public hearing before they start to formally vote on it.
Right,
Procedurally, to achieve what you want to achieve, I guess I see two options for you all. Option one would be don't make your formal final vote tonight.
Yep.
Instead,
table it,
well, not
or,
table, but formalize, what draft changes you would like to see made. And then, postpone consideration until you have that draft back. So essentially, don't send it back to council until you see that draft. Or make your motion to amend, and then in that motion, sort of list out each amendment you guys are considering, and you could even make those as sort of little subsidiary motions and vote on each proposed self-change individually.
Okay.
Well, I guess I'll make a motion that we revise this based on the comments made tonight and bring it back to the planning commission for one last review.
My only caveat is that if council wished at 45 days after the date on my application, if council wants to move forward without hearing from you, they can.
That's okay, we'll
That's up
talk
to
to them later then.
I just wanted to make sure you're aware of that.
Well,
Still
I would
my
hope that
motion.
yes, and I will second that motion. I would hope the council would, even if they move forward, would take our comments in tonight's meeting into consideration. I will second the motion. We have a forward and a second. Can we call to vote, please?
Mr. Bolus?
Yes.
Mr. LePage?
Yes.
Mr. Dowd-Payne?
Yes.
Mr. Sarah?
Yes,
Okay. Next on the agenda is an ordinance amending chapter 1125, definitions, specifically division 1125.02, subsection A, subsection 25, driveway, private residence, and chapter 1133.08, single family and two family residential district regulations, specifically subsection 1133.08, subsection C, additional regulations for garages, parking areas, driveways, and vehicles of the codified ordinances of the city of North Canton to allow permeable pavers as a permitted driveway and accessory parking paving surface in residential districts. Okay. Would anyone from the applicant like to present this issue before the commission?
Yes, my name is David Matheny. I am city council for Ward 2. So a little backstory on this was members in my ward, residents, Taylors, they live on 1043 East Maple. They have a gravel driveway. We're in front of the zoning board of appeal, adding a garage to their property, plenty of room, no issues there. But we're told that their application to have their gravel driveway extended to the new garage was not in our ordinances at the time. That they were gonna have to make their driveway either concrete or asphalt. And they were asking for the permeable pavers as another option. And there's been a lot of changes and opportunities here. So if you're not familiar with the permeable pavers, what they're looking at is it's a plastic grid. And it's filled with an aggregate, tamped down, keeps the driveway looking neat. It's in a lot of areas. It's even being used in parking lots. And the main reason for that is it's environmentally friendly. Water absorbs through it, it goes into the ground. And if you look back at some of our issues, I don't know that we need to add any more concrete and blacktop to our stormwater issues that we have and we're trying to get corrected. So here is an option for residents to use. And it's even more cost friendly for residents. So some of these gravel driveways exist because they are in very large properties and they're very deep and some of them are not maintained. So here gives the residents that want to improve their property a cost-friendly, environmentally friendly option to improve their driveway and help the city. So now in this ordinance, that doesn't change the fact that the apron needs to be concrete. So we don't have the gravel going right up to the street and gravel getting into our storm system. It still has to have the concrete apron up to the sidewalk area, that area. And then it can be those permeable pavers. And that's what they're asking for the planning commission to approve and put into the ordinance as another option besides just concrete and asphalt.
Okay.
Questions?
Do you know the life expectancy of those permeable pavers?
I don't know the actual life expectancy of them. It's a plastic grid. It's being used in large parking areas in the cities. Probably, yeah, I don't know. We could research that for you if you'd like.
Well, when we were looking at them with engineering to decide whether or not engineering would be on board with this. The ones that, Mr. Matheny's residents were attempting to get installed was rated for 20 to 25 years.
Thank you, Ben.
Okay. Any comments, Martin, from the city's perspective?
This has come up a number of times over the years where residents have wanted to make improvements to their properties, but either cost or just timing of getting concrete contractors on their property to do the work has been prohibitive. And we have had residents who have changed their mind against improving their property as a result of the current ordinance, which requires asphalt or concrete. We do have another resident that is wanting to put a recreational vehicle parking place on their property. They've, been paying fees to store it elsewhere. They have the room to do this. They're, in a part of town that's less dense. And it makes sense to have this RV parking space. And that resident did share with me, they did get some bids for concrete, and they were coming in at the ballpark of $22,000 for the concrete. Then the next issue was getting them out there. Many of the contractors were not available this season. And this alternative, or one of the manufacturers they looked into, it's readily available, and his cost estimate for this alternative was around $8,000, so less than half. And the parking areas, which we've seen this type of product installed, looks nice. As it was mentioned, it does allow for the stormwater to absorb through the parking surface and help mitigate some of the impact on the city's storm sewer. We've looked into, a few alternatives, as well as some of the jurisdictions in the area that do permit this. It does seem to be a viable option, and staff recommends an approval.
Okay. Questions from commission members?
Well, I know two residences that currently have solid pavers for a driveway over by the school. But I guess the concern I have is that how does it hold up over time? And you've seen a lot of drives or roads that were not put in properly, where over time they kind of have those swells as the vehicles drive on it, and it's not maintained. Now, you can say that same with asphalt or concrete too, it breaks up. But, we're not talking about a large area like a commercial building. We're talking, so we're not really talking about, a lot of water that's shedding into the storm sewer system. It's not going to save the city from flooding of the backup of the storms with a 500-year rain that we've been getting. So I don't see the benefits there by allowing, driveways with pavers. And they have to be put in properly. I mean, there has to be a base underneath them to support the weight, so that, because it moves independently. And that's the problem, the downside of this type of a drive. It doesn't work as one like a concrete drive does. It works individually, and it can move. So if it's not put in right, it's going to look pretty bad over
Would that
time.
be the case also for concrete that wasn't put in correctly? blacktop, it wasn't.
Say again, Dave, say again.
That, I think that falls true to asphalt and concrete, if not installed properly, we're gonna have the potholes in the blacktop and the concrete that's gonna be not level and stuff like that. I agree, it needs to be installed properly.
In this, and I might add that with this type of product that has been presented, it does appear to be a more financially available remedy to repair parts of the driveway as opposed to, say a asphalt driveway that was installed incorrectly. With asphalt and concrete, you're removing that, where this can be what it appears to be adjusted and regraded with some additional gravel. I mean, even with that, we do have the property maintenance code, so if it does go into disrepair, there is an ordinance that addresses that, and that, we can send them a letter to let them know they are in violation, and many of the residents, respect that and will address it at that point. But the maintenance on this does seem to be more of a, more financially available and less of an impact on the accounts.
I would agree with what you're saying, but on this ordinance, the way it's written, the only thing it states is that pavers filled with crushed limestone or other aggregate consistent with manufacturer's specifications. I don't know, is that leaving it wide open? How it's installed?
I think requiring what the manufacturers suggest is gonna give you the best quality results. Manufacturers putting that out there.
I would agree, but have you ever looked on what they suggest?
There's a website that's called,
Yeah, I mean, the manufacturer is gonna suggest the proper base and everything in their specs.
They're gonna suggest a suitable material underneath it.
Right.
They don't define it in most cases of what I've found.
Chairman Dawkins. And Marty, would this require a permit and also an inspection from the city for someone to install this?
So this would fall under the ordinance. If it's a registered contractor, they would not need a permit.
Okay.
If it's a owner builder, they would need a permit.
Trying to answer your question, the ones we reviewed when deciding whether or not we would entertain putting this amendment together, they recommended some sort of edge material to hold the grid in place, so like a brick lining along the side, right? And then they have like True Grid, the one that's competing, they actually sort of sell you the whole kit. So they give you the base plus the plastic grid, and then you put, crushed limestone in it. And
Have you seen what happens to the edge material over time?
if it's not maintained, it can push out, I'm sure.
That's my concern. It's just, I like the idea, but I understand. I mean, it's a supply and demand at this point. In 2 years from now, we don't know. Concrete may be readily available, and there may be people out there pouring concrete driveways again.
and residents will choose that as their best option.
Yeah,
This
it's
gives them
cheaper.
third option.
So,
Currently the code just states asphalt or concrete, correct?
Or
Brick pavers?
or a surface approved by the city engineer.
Okay.
Similar surface.
so this is covered anyways. If you approved it, except not for residential.
Well, the current code includes the phrase hard surface. This
Yeah,
technically
hard,
would not
yeah,
qualify
it
as
says,
hard.
it's like impervious surface, basically.
That's all I gotta add.
Yeah. I mean, we should have an option for permeable surfaces. And then like to Tom's point, the question of what kind of permeable surfaces or products might be the bigger question. I mean, for instance, at my office, we have a permeable paver. So it's a hard surface paver. It's like a brick paver, but it has corners on it that sets them apart so that the water can get down through the pavers and through the soil. I mean, our entire surface was engineered that way. And to your point of stormwater reduction, we have zero stormwater that leaves via city services. No, we're not in this city, but where we're at, the stormwater traverses the site, goes through the permeable pavers and goes into the ground and never leaves out of a pipe. So that was one instance of mitigating storm runoff. And it's not a big parking lot, so every little bit does help. I mean, there's tons of these products, whether it be concrete pavers that have openings in them and you can fill them with limestone, or even let grass grow in there. I know that the True Grid was the one mentioned. That's a plastic grid, and then it gets filled with, gravel, and it's rolled and compressed in there. I do understand Mr. Sarah's point of what happens if it's not done properly or the edge isn't done right. But I do see that. I mean, that could happen with any product, I guess. But I do think we need some sort of option for permeable surfaces. Because there's permeable asphalt that looks better than concrete. There is. I've seen it in person. It looks better than concrete and it's permeable. So we need something in here, definitely. I understand the concern of the resident. I would prefer to have permeable pavers as my driveway. I would prefer if they were filled with grass so that it minimized the amount of hard surface you could even see. So I think we need something here to adjust this. I guess, Tom, I understand your concerns for sure. So I don't know. This is the best verbiage to get this done properly for everybody with everyone's best interest, but I don't know if anybody else has any comments or thoughts on it. I think by the manufacturer's specifications, that does quell some of the concern of bad installation. And Martin, like you said, if a homeowner is doing, I mean, the contractor has to be registered. So just like any other thing, I would think they would be certified to do this.
Well, and with the contractor, they typically have a warranty as part of that, and then of course their name's associated to that as well. So you get a little more reassurance.
I mean, or is it something where if it's a permeable surface that it needs to be approved and inspected by the director of permits? Where it has to run across your desk before it can be installed. What
Well,
I'm
it
saying?
still goes back to the fact that when it's installed, it looks nice at first, but down the road, it starts to be an eyesore. That could be 5 years, could be 10 years, could be 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
But that's true with a hard surface. So I see both sides of it.
Okay. All right.
Look at all the angles.
Yeah. Okay. Any other comments, thoughts? So at this time, I'm going to entertain a motion regarding 1125 specifically Division 112502, driveway private residence, and Chapter 113308, single-family, two-family residential district regulations, specifically subsection 113308C, additional regulations for garages, parking areas, driveways, and vehicles of the codified ordinances to allow permeable pavers as a permitted driveway accessorating surface.
I'll make the motion to approve it as submitted.
I'll second. Take a call to vote.
Mr. Sarah?
No,
Mr. Dalpes?
Yes.
Mr. LePage?
Yes.
Mr. Volos?
Yes.
All right. At this time, if there's anything else that needs to be brought up tonight,
Can we circle back on that?
yeah, sure. You can circle back on the adjudication minutes. Oh yeah, we'll do that for since Tom's here, correct? So let's go back to, I'd like to take another vote. Since Mr. Sarah wasn't here for a reading of our minutes for consideration, I would like to get his vote on the August 3rd, well, we can do all three of them, Mr. Sarah. The June 1st, 22 meeting minutes for approval.
I approve.
This August 3rd, 22 adjudication hearing minutes for approval.
I approve.
And the August 30th, 22 adjudication hearing minutes for approval.
I approve.
Okay. Is there anything else, Martin?
That covers it, thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right. I think we're
Make a
Good.
motion adjourned.
I will second the motion. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.